It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers, to one of your absolute favorite podcasts on one of your absolute favorite radio networks. You know, here at Don't Quill the Messenger, we are so super proud to be a part of the Dragon Wagon Radio Network, an independent podcast network that is now celebrating its 5-year anniversary. And over the past 5 years, Dragon Wagon Radio has produced 19 different podcast series featuring 27 different hosts who have welcomed 551 guests while recording the course of 1,277 individual episodes, which have now been combined listened to more than 4 million times. But the most important number of all of these numbers is the number 0, which is how much those shows have cost listeners to listen to. Absolutely 0, free of charge to you. And in most cases, religiously every 2 weeks, dropping a new episode for your enjoyment. So as the network celebrates a half a decade of fantastically free podcasts, we do hope that you will consider showing your support by visiting dragonwagonradio.com. dragonwagonradio.com, where you can find the other series that are part of the network that we are so proud to be a part of. And you can also lend your support. You can go to the support page. You can subscribe. You can help us out by reviewing the shows that you have listened to and that you enjoy. And you can also visit the swag shop and purchase some Dragon Wagon swag. Get your Dragon Wagon swag on at dragonwagonradio.com. We thank you all for being such loyal listeners and for enjoying this series as well as the other series on the network. Before I introduce my next guest here at Don't Quill the Messenger, I'd also like to remind you that Don't Quill the Messenger is sponsored by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. To find out more, go to shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, where you can learn about the Shakespeare authorship question, Oxfordianism, and how to become a member of the organization. Also want to remind you that though the program is sponsored by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, the views and comments of this host and my guests are entirely our own and do not necessarily reflect the views and positions of the entire organization. Well, that's a given, isn't it? We are all individuals and we have individual minds and individual brains. One of the things that we love about our fellow Quillers is that we all ask our own questions, and we keep asking those questions week after week. Someone who has been asking questions and guiding others through questions is my guest today's episode, and his name is Ray Matthews. Ray is what he calls himself to be the guide of a Shakespeare reader group that he hosts in his town of Salt Lake City, Utah. He is the editor of, and I'm finding it right here, it is called understandingshakespeare.com. Understandingshakespeare.com. Ray, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for inviting me.
Ray, I'm really curious, how did you come to be the guide of a Shakespeare reading group in the first place? And how long have you been doing that?
Well, quite accidentally. I've had 4 different careers, and my last career was as a librarian, and I retired in February of 2019. And I've been a person who has always liked to do new things. I've never really labeled myself as far as an occupation or having a particular interest. And so when I retired, I thought, I just want to do something different that I've never done before. And there are 2 things that immediately came to mind. I have no musical talent, so I thought, well, I will learn to play the guitar and in my retirement. And then the second thing was that I had this interest in Shakespeare for about 10 years previously. And I thought, well, this would be an opportune time to get into the study of Shakespeare. I no sooner got into that when the pandemic started, and I started. Well, I was thinking about doing a website, the Understanding Shakespeare, having a kind of a blog of my learning experiences, and I found that as a novice, I had kind of bit off more than what I could chew. I didn't know. I didn't really know much about Shakespeare. I'm not a Shakespearean scholar. I'm not. I don't have an English degree. I've never studied Shakespeare in college. I'm kind of like a lot of people that all I knew about Shakespeare was what I learned in high school, and that was many years ago. And so I thought, well, gee, before I start this blog and writing, I better read the works. I better learn a little bit about Shakespeare. So at that point, the pandemic hit, and I said, gee, I'm kind of isolated. So I went online, went through some, I think I started at meetup.com and found that there were some online groups that met and read Shakespeare. And so I fortuitously started with the I Read Shakespeare group out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Led by Robin Williams. And it's a longstanding group that's been meeting first in person starting back in 2002. And then during the pandemic, they went online. And so I think it was in January of 2020, I started joining online with them. And we read Othello together, and it was an eye-opening experience. It's what they call a close reading group, and with close reading, they assign a character in the play, a persona, for someone to read, and then they stop about every couple of lines and ask, what did we just read? What was the meaning of that? And so the way that they're particular.
So I could take with a play like Othello, which has a stage running time of about 3. In fact, I have a friend who's no longer on this plane, but when he was alive, he used to say that Othello is the fastest 3 hours on stage. And so doing it that way, though, would that how long did that take to get through a play of that length?
Well, the way they do it, they have in the Santa Fe group, they have a fast read and a slow read. And so they read close reading a section, which might be a half, in their case, a few pages. And then the next week they come back and do a fast read of what they read the previous week. And then they go to another slow read. They started in about the 1st of January, and they didn't finish, I don't think, until about July or August. It took them about 6 months to read through Othello at the pace they were going. And then at the very end, they read through the entire play, one fast read, really fast through it. And that takes about 3 hours, approximately. Wow.
Well, that's an incredible length of time. That's a fantastic intensive study of that play. I mean, a 6-month intensive on Othello. I mean, that puts you in, I would say, scholarly realm, because how many English literature scholars have actually spent 6 months dissecting one Shakespeare play?
Yeah. And that was my experience as well. I was just in awe. And in that group, they have quite a few PhDs, former professors of English literature. Robin herself has a PhD. And then there are a number of actors with acting experience who just read so fantastically, and it was just this eye-opening experience for me to participate. And not only that, they met twice a week, and so while they were reading Othello on Saturday, on Wednesday they got together reading one of the history plays. And so this was a dedicated group, far beyond my own capacity to take that all in. But it was such a good experience that I thought, gee, here in Utah, we have the Utah Shakespeare Festival that meets in Cedar City. We have 2 universities right here in the town where I live. We have a lot of playhouses that perform Shakespeare locally. Why don't we have something like that here? And I found out that a few years ago there was a Salt Lake Shakespeare Society that met, but during COVID they could no longer meet in person, and so they kind of I wouldn't say disbanded. I think the Salt Lake Shakespeare Society still exists, but they no longer met. And so I couldn't find a group meeting. And so I thought, hey, well, why don't I start one of these? It looks like, even though they went into the weeds with Othello, the whole concept of reading together seemed pretty straightforward to me. It was something I could do, I thought. So that's how I got my interest in starting a reading group. The obstacles, though, do you meet online or do you meet in person? And like I say, this was right in the middle of the pandemic, so I tried to investigate. And so I first contacted the Utah Shakespeare Festival, and I said, I'd like to start a reading group here. And we'll read the plays that you're performing during the summer, May through October down at Cedar City. And
that's an awesome idea when you have a Shakespeare festival right in your backyard. That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah. And I thought, well, gee, we could get a whole lot of people excited about the plays. They would read, they would know about them. They would tell their neighbors, they, get their friends, their kids, their parents, and go down together, just generate some enthusiasm. But, I contacted the festival several times and got absolutely no answer. So that's interesting. That's interesting. So I then contacted the local library. We have the second largest library system in the United States here, called the County Library, 20-some branches. And I personally knew the director. I knew the director, the associate director over public affairs, community affairs. I used to work with him, and I thought, well, let's see if I could get the county library to sponsor a reading group. They have buildings, libraries throughout the county, and they have large and small meeting rooms. I was thinking that to start with, if I was lucky, I'd get maybe 8 people, and we'd use one of the small reading rooms. I contacted them, and boy, I couldn't believe the red tape. They had to run it past several levels of committees, and they have their own programming, and their programming had gone online. And at that time, the timing was just bad. It was kind of complicated for them to just do their own program. They didn't know when. The libraries at that time were closed. The meeting rooms were closed, and so we were looking at an online possibility.
No, in any other circumstance, in like I hate the worst of the use of the word COVID times and non-COVID times, but it tends to be the only thing that can really describe the before and after of the way the world has changed. But in non-COVID times, I assume, and maybe I'm wrong and you could educate me, but I would assume that it's not that difficult to go to a library or a city center and put in an application to use the facility for an activity such as this. Maybe you have to provide some kind of insurance or some kind of cleaning deposit or something like that. But it seems to me like, if public facilities are available to the public, and especially for an activity that corresponds so well with what a library's mission and vision is for the community.
Yes, I think that's true. That was true here. They have an online form. So if you're doing a piano recital, for example, my local library, we have a youth group that does music recitals, and they schedule the large meeting room, and they meet once a month for that. And then other groups do that. It's a very nice option, and I think most communities throughout the country do have libraries, and they welcome groups to use the rooms, schedule the rooms, and normally that would be a nice option. The Santa Fe group, they're affiliated with the International Shakespeare Center in Santa Fe, and they actually have their own building there. And so prior to COVID, they met in their own building. But just starting out here, I didn't have enough room in my living room to host a group, and so that's why I was looking for the public library. But that didn't work out, and so I thought, well, gee, what's the next best option? My initial plan was to just invite everyone. I was hoping to get kids excited about Shakespeare, and have all age groups come to this, have it open to the public. So my next option, since the county system turned me down and said, well, we don't know when it might be an option. Time was now running out. It was now March. I spent like 2 months, and so it was now March. So I contacted the aging and adult services for the Salt Lake County, and they operate 17 senior centers throughout the county. One of them is located fairly close to where I live, and there's others within a few miles. And they have meeting rooms, and they had groups. They were in the same situation that initially they were closed down, and they had a few course offerings via WebEx that they were using. So I applied, and I didn't know, again, the red tape. I had to go through a contract process with the county, and they had to review it with the county district attorney. They had some
and so suddenly you became a contract instructor for the county senior citizen services department. Is that what happened?
Well, they were used to having like attorneys come and talk about the drafting of
estate planning,
right? And
yeah, sure, right.
and financial advisors and those kinds of people have their own product. CPAs. They have a product that they're selling. Sometimes they had authors come who had books to sell, and so they wanted to be very careful about inviting people who might have a commercial interest. And they had a number of different programs. I was involved at the Senior Center in a guitar class. As I mentioned, that was the first thing I wanted to do after I retired. So I was already going up there for a guitar class. So I knew that they did have some in-person programs like that. And so so I volunteered. I said, "Hey, I'll volunteer. It's no pay. There's no payment involved. I'm not trying to sell a book. I'm not trying to make money on the side in any way. I just want to volunteer to try to generate enthusiasm for the reading of Shakespeare." And so finally, they agreed to that. And about the time that they said go ahead, the pandemic was winding down, and so now it was last summer, And we started the first class on June 1st. And my initial plan was to read the 4 plays that were being produced in Cedar City last summer. That was the Comedy of Errors, Richard III, Pericles, and Cymbeline. The Utah Shakespeare Festival is pretty cool. They're going through the entire canon in a cycle, and so they cycle through every play of Shakespeare, and it takes them about 8 years, I think, to do that. And so Pericles and Cymbeline are plays that are kind of rarely performed. So it was a nice opportunity to read those plays.
That's quite a lineup, actually. You know, of the 4 plays you just mentioned, only Richard III is really what most Shakespearean scholars and producers and artists would declare as being, you know, sort of an A-list play, whereas Comedy of Errors is more of a B-list play. And then, as you mentioned, you know, Pericles and Cymbeline tend to fall down sort of to the C-list of Shakespearean works. Even though I think that they're both fantastic works, and especially from an autobiographical standpoint as a Shakespeare doubter, but they're really not, as you say, not very often produced, and only usually when there is some place like the Utah Shakespearean Festival doing, you know, a canon run, as you would call it, you know, trying to cycle through all 37, or in some cases, if they're including, you know, some of the more obscure, what we call apocrypha plays, maybe it's 38, 39 plays.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad to see that they're doing that. And I'm glad to see that they're not afraid of those titles and the ticket sales. And most importantly, I'm excited to see that they're still doing 4 Shakespeare plays a year, as opposed to some of the other festivals that exist in the world that have, you know, almost eliminated Shakespeare from their repertory, including here in Southern Oregon, where I live, where Ashland is barely touching on Shakespeare anymore.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I see that Ashland is doing the Tempest and King John in this season, and so we had a great time. We started with the Comedy of Errors, twofold. One that was being played there, and well, threefold. The second reason, it's the shortest play in the canon, and so I thought, well, that would be a good one to kind of wet our teeth on, and everybody likes a comedy, so and I didn't anticipate it. I was wrong about this, but I didn't anticipate it having a lot of substance to it. And thirdly, it's one of the plays that the International Shakespeare Center has a reader's edition for. If you go on go to Amazon, for example, and look for the Shakespeare Readers edition, you'll find that Robin has edited and published. They publish on demand about 12 readers editions of Shakespeare plays, and they're really nice. They're designed specifically for readers and close reading. They have. I think teachers would love these, because they have questions that you can ask the class as you're reading. It has a glossary with it, but it's not an overwhelming glossary. I usually read the Arden 3 editions, because I'm a real footnote nut, and I really like the glossaries, but they kind of interrupt the flow, if you will, of the reading. And so these books are written or published with a nice size print, space in between the lines, bold face for the characters. It makes a nice book to read, particularly as for senior citizens. In our group has members from the ages of 50 to 96. And so
wow,
for those who, and then some of them have eyesight issues as well. So as we read, we another nice feature of the senior center is it has a screen and a projector. So we take either the PDF version of the Reader's Edition, or one of the free versions, and typically the Folgers, the PDF version of that the Folger library produces, and we project it up on the screen, and we can enlarge the print, to a huge size. And so those who are visually challenged can sit, close to the screen and read it from the screen. So it makes it nice. And so this Reader's Edition is beautiful. We've used it for the Comedy of Errors, and then we've actually read 7 plays together now. One of the things we found is very first off, right out of the box, on the very first day, I discovered that, well, this was a different group than that seasoned group of readers in Santa Fe. They had been reading together for years, and they were I would call them a scholarly group. When we announced it up here, I went to one of the meetings. We have a group called Current Events at the Senior Center, and they just talk about current events. I said, hey, next Wednesday, we're going to be starting a Shakespeare reading group. Anybody interested? And there's a big show of hands. And so right from the start, on day one, I had 8 people from the current events class come to Shakespeare Readers. And for the most part,
that's a great start. That's for a first time out of the box. That's a wonderful start.
Yeah. And it was really good with Comedy of Errors, because there were only about 12, it's a play without that many parts. There were only about 12 or 14 parts. And so it just worked out really well. Our last play, the one that
you're going to need to recruit some more participants if you're going to dive into something like Julius Caesar.
Well, yeah. Our last play that we just completed was Antony and Cleopatra. And so,
oh my goodness, that's a giant cast list.
Yeah. So on Wednesday, this last Wednesday, we had 26 reading parts. Now, fortunately, our class has grown from 8. We had 25 people at this last class, and we had a couple people.
That's fantastic, Ray. That's great growth in what, in a year, a little under a year?
Yeah. When we first set this up, Robin is my mentor. I call her my mentor, but she guided me through the process. And before we, sometime while we're together here, I'm going to share with your listeners, some additional resources, because this is something. It's something not unique. It's not me. It's not Robin. It's not a particular tool. This is something that's reproducible in every community. You can do this. You can start your own reading group and have it be a success. And so this last.
Okay, so now one of the things before you move on. One of the things you did answer my question, because I was curious about whether you're making sure that everyone is using the same version for your group. I know when I'm producing a production, I'm partial to the Penguin Shakespeare version, Pelican Shakespeare, the Penguin editions. One, the annotations are very good and very clear, and they don't pull punches when it comes to jokes about sexuality or physical body parts or that kind of a thing, which is important. They keep all the body humor in there, which is important, I believe, to the story. But also they're very handy. They're easy for actors to carry around on stage. If I'm not going with purchasing the Pelican versions, then I tend to go to the MIT.edu online free versions because I think their text is very true. But I was curious to know what version you use and if you make sure everyone's on the same version, because you could say turn to line number 382 on page 48, and suddenly if you have actors with different versions or readers with different versions, nobody knows where everybody is. So that's super important. But also to take that to the next step, if you have 25 participants now and they all have, or for the most part, many of them have 5, 6, 7 plays under their belt now, you're just one step away from producing your own play. You realize that, right?
No, no, I didn't realize that. We do have we do have a gentleman that comes who's a professional actor. It's kind of interesting. He's been coming. Not everybody. As I mentioned, the group is growing. So with every play that we've done 7 plays now. With every play, we get about 4 new people, and so some of the newer people haven't had the experience with the older plays, but we have a gentleman who's an actor, and I kind of asked him the other day, a couple of weeks ago, why he wasn't reading. I didn't ask that directly because I don't embarrass anyone, and it's a very open, non-threatening, non-judgmental type of atmosphere. We don't correct people if they mispronounce a word or if they have any difficulties with the reading. It's just really an enjoyable experience. But he kind of sensed that that I was wondering why he didn't participate, and he came up to me and he said, "Well, I'm in the Actors Guild, and if I do a job, an acting job that isn't without the permission of the guild, I can be sanctioned." And so he was just overly concerned that this reading was an actual performance, which it isn't. We don't. No.
I mean, obviously, as an entertainer, I'm familiar with the unions and I'm familiar with the union rules. I think he's fine. I think he'll absolutely be fine. He's not receiving any pay. There's no audience in the room. No one else is a professional actor. I think he's a little overly worried about his union affiliation status.
Yeah. So the original group were people like me who hadn't touched Shakespeare since high school. We had one gentleman from the Middle East who he speaks excellent English, better than I do, but he wanted to come to work on his English skills and learn and work on his English vocabulary. And
fantastic.
He reads Shakespeare and understands it and provides amazing insights for the group. Everyone comes for a different reason, and so we were all novices to start, and by word of mouth, people started inviting their friends, and we had one lady who was in the current events group who is a retired AP English teacher. And I spoke to her in the hall once. I said, you ought to come to Shakespeare. And the reply I got was kind of, well, I don't think I'd get anything out of it with this group of novices. She didn't say that, but that was kind of the impression I had. And so we read a few plays, and all of a sudden someone said, you'll really add to the group by coming, because with your knowledge of English literature and so on. So she's been coming for the last 3 plays, and she's been fantastic. She says, I never imagined how much I would learn. And she said, I've been retired for 20 years, and I hadn't realized how little I've used my brain cells in the last 20 years. And this is activating parts of my brain and bringing back ideas and bringing back memories that I never, I had lost. I lost that, she said. And
she's absolutely right. In fact, there are studies. There was a professor in England, I believe through Cambridge. I could be incorrect. It's been a long time since I did the research on this, but there is a professor in England who did tests with patients who were suffering from memory loss, dementia, and Alzheimer's. And they put a brain scan on them, and then they gave them different texts to read. And the Shakespearean text sparked more brain function than any other writer. The closest was Yeats. He sparked a lot of brain activity on these tests that they did, but nobody touched the level of Shakespeare as far as sparking brain activity, especially in the areas where it promoted memory retention.
I don't doubt that at all. The interesting thing that we're discovering reading through the plays is that Shakespeare is writing on multiple levels at the same time, and the words he uses, the stories, the references he puts in can be interpreted in multiple ways. So something that on the surface seems rather straightforward, there's historical references, and then just the vocabulary. These plays that we've been reading in the last year we've read a couple of Roman plays and Mediterranean setting plays, and there's a lot of references to mythology and mythological characters. A lot of it taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses. A lot of it taken from Plutarch's tales. There's so many levels you can read it at. So when we went through the Comedy of Errors, one of the initial things that I found that was interesting was all the legal references. This is a play that's a comedy, supposedly with some characters that are kind of like clowns with the two Dromios, and yet there's so many legal references in this play. We in class we took a look at Shakespeare's legal language by B.J. Sokol, for example, and we then kind of cross-referenced the legal references in Comedy of Errors, and found, well over 30 references. Things like fine and recovery. That if you look up in the OED, it says it's a practice of commencing and formally compromising a fictitious or collusive lawsuit to effect a curtailment of entail or the transfer for ownership and title of land from one party to another. Something that you'd maybe find in Black's Law Dictionary. Well, this is thrown in the play, and when you actually see it on stage, it goes right over your head. If I said to somebody watching Comedy of Errors, name 10 legal things that are found in the play, like bonds and references to attorneys and debts and witchcraft trials, different kinds of courtroom things that you'd find in a courtroom, people would miss it, but they're in there. And then we found, as I mentioned, you can read it at a couple of different levels, the same words. In Comedy of Errors, there's a point where the two Dromios that are long separated twins, but haven't, they're now in the city of Ephesus, and they haven't discovered that their twin is there, but they're on either side of a door at the house of Antipholus, and one Dromio is inside and one Dromio is outside, and they're having this banter back and forth. And when you see it on stage, it's just really comedic. But at one point, the Antipholus, who owns this house and is trying to get into his house, where his wife is inside. And at this point, I think the other Antipholus is inside and the other Dromio is inside, but they've barred the door to keep the real Antipholus out. And he asked, "Go borrow me a crow," and it's a reference to a crowbar. They're trying to break in, go borrow me a crow, and
They went back then. They called them iron crows.
Yeah, exactly.
There's also a mention in Romeo and Juliet where Friar Lawrence says, "I need an iron crow to open the Capulet monument."
Yeah, and we would probably say crowbar now, but they
Right.
had reference of crow. So you're seeing that visually on the stage, and that's what you're thinking of. But then Dromio says, "Well, when fowls have no feathers and fish have no fins." And then the other Dromio says, "Well, a crow without feather, master, mean you so? For a fish without a fin, there's a fowl without a feather." And then it goes on. He says, "Well, the crowbar will help us, sir. We'll pluck a crow together." And so when you see that on stage, it kind of goes over your head. But when we read that together, man, this seems like an obvious reference to something we've read before by who's the guy, Robert Greene, and that Groat's Worth of Wit. He, I guess, that's something that comes up quite often in your podcast with your guests. But this play, Comedy of Errors, was first produced. It was one of the earliest plays that, well, it's one of the earliest plays that we have a record of it being performed. And so I think, if I recall right, it was first done at Gray's Inn in 1594. It could be a year off on that, but it was one of the.
Look at you! You started off the program saying, "Well, I'm not a Shakespearean scholar," and now you're throwing out these obscure references to these comedy plays. You know the history of performance of the play. You have 25 followers who are reading 7 plays a year with you, and I'm telling you, brother, you're on your way to producing your own theatrical production. I see it now.
Well, we have some in our group that are members of the. We have a local group here that I was aware of before we started doing the Shakespeare Readers, and it's called the Babcock Performing Readers, and they meet at one of our county libraries, and they actually read from literature various things. Over Christmas, they did How the Grinch Stole Christmas and that kind of thing. They actually read and perform it on stage. We haven't quite got to that, but as you read this, we start talking about it and talking about historical references, and so this particular play came out like 1594 at Gray's Inn, which is the essentially the law school. There are four inns of court then and now. All 4 of them still exist, and so if you're a solicitor or barrister in England, you're a member of one of those 4 inns of courts, and when the play is performed there, it's being performed in front of a legal audience, and that's why I think that there's so many legal references in this play. It's because he's throwing these in. Whoever the author is, he's throwing these in to tantalize, the lawyers present at the performance, and they're going to get it. They're going to understand those legal references, and since this came out like a year after Robert Greene's Groat's Worth of Wit, it's going to be a contemporary reference to that. Reference to the upstart crow, and in that reference to upstart crow, it talks about this individual who is new on the scene, who has taken upon himself some of the language and plays of others, and beautified himself with our feathers, maybe taking credit for what's been written or created by some of the others. And at the same time we were doing this play, I had joined the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, and there was an article in one of the issues about how, oh no, the upstart crow, that's not a reference to Shakespeare. It's a reference to Edward Allen, the famous actor, the most famous actor on the stage in Elizabethan 1590s. And no, it's not really Shakespeare. But I had no sooner read that article, and then we had read this in the Comedy of Errors, and I thought, no, man, the timing of this is too coincidental. The reference to the fowl without a feather, the crowbar being the fowl without a feather. I thought, no, what he's doing is he's making a kind of making fun of himself here. Robert Groats or Chettle, whoever wrote Groatsworth of Wit, that's that particular section that we're familiar with, was making a criticism of Shakespeare, and he's coming back and lampooning himself here in this play, and to me that's something that you wouldn't get, you wouldn't notice, you wouldn't wouldn't get it at all, and it wasn't something found in the glossary. We have in our readers, you asked about glossaries, editions, Shakespeare editions. Our readers use about 5 or 6 different editions. And you're right, the line numbering is off, different in some of them. Fortunately, we've read plays that, for the most part, there's a standard edition. So, for example, Antony and Cleopatra, you're just dealing with the version that came out in the folio. But for some of them, like for Pericles, we had to deal with two quarto editions in addition to the.
Well, don't get me wrong. I mean, I personally own at least a dozen different complete works by different publishing houses and different editors, as well as individual versions of many of the plays. In fact, there's a Yale version from the beginning of the early last century that I refer to regularly, that I have almost nearly a complete set. I'm missing a couple of the titles. But the annotations in that version are so different from what you find today, and highly enlightening. So, when I'm working on a production, I will study multiple editions of the play to get to the meanings of certain symbolisms, certain exchanges between characters, and that kind of a thing, in order to be as well informed as I possibly can about what's going on the stage. And sounds like that you're doing all of that. You're just not performing in front of an audience. You're just performing for each other, which, by the way, is the number one precept of theater. I say to actors all the time, your goal on stage is to create a character so particularly detailed to the character, and have this moment with your fellow actor on the stage that affects them and their character. The audience is just lucky enough to witness the art as it's happening between the artists. But you're not performing for the audience. You're performing, in essence, then, for each other.
Well, I'm gonna take that sage advice and mention that to the class, because I think you're absolutely right. I've seen such a development in the class members. We had readers that kind of struggled at first with the language. It's almost, in a way, it kind of reminds me of German sometimes, with the placement of the verb not being in the position in a sentence where you'd expect it.
We in rehearsals, we sometimes refer to that as Yoda speak. We're like, oh, did that character just use Yoda speak? Because that sure did sound like some. And then we'll do like, Yoda's voice. The force is strong with this one. Because sometimes Shakespeare does. He puts things in certain phrasing, and part of it's because he wants to stick to the meter, right? He's got that iambic pentameter flowing through, and it has to come out a certain way, and certain beats, and certain words need emphasis, and certain words do not. But yeah, sometimes it can come out a little bit like Yoda speak.
Yeah, and the class, though, they've gotten used to that, and it's surprising now as we pick up new plays. We just read Antony and Cleopatra, and before that, The Tempest, and before that, All's Well That Ends Well, and King Lear. And as we progress through the plays, you can tell in their reading that they stumble less and less. They pick up on the meter, the flow, and we're even now to the point where some of the readers, start putting in the pauses and reflective understandings, that you see in the professional actors. They'll kind of read ahead. They'll see the big picture as opposed to just seeing words on the page. They see the big picture. They understand now what the character, the emotions, what they're going through the character, what the character is feeling, and so now they have the pauses. They even recognize now with some of the comic characters, they do them with like a different accent or different voice. What I call a different voicing, and it's really hilarious. So we have several in the class that never took Shakespeare in college. One of our great readers. He said yesterday or this week that he studied auto mechanics basically in high school, never had taken English or Shakespeare, but was always interested in performing on stage and had played a part in one of his high school plays. And so he always had that performing instinct, and he was always drawn to, I want to get back on stage. And so in reading this, he has just blossomed. We have one of the things we have really fun with in Shakespeare reading is the music. We never, certainly none of us in our class had recognized that Shakespeare, in addition to being a dramatist, was so interested in the music, writing music, and including music and dance in these performances. When I've seen Shakespeare on, maybe on some of the BBC programs or on television, they'll have an orchestra which might play some background music. But what we've discovered, one of the books that has been really helpful to us is Shakespeare's Songbook by Ross Duffin. And
I own it, and it comes with its own CD,
yes,
right?
Yes. So
yeah, I own that book. It's very good. I use it in some of my productions.
Yeah. So you take some of those plays like the Tempest. The Tempest, I think, has 9 songs in it. And so sometimes we play the music from the CD, or sometimes we just make up our own music. There's some of the songs that some of the songs, like the Willow song in Othello, was a traditional song that he incorporated, and I think there's some traditional music for that. But there's other songs that are obviously written by Shakespeare, but we don't have the music, and so we use our imaginations and sing those. And we had kind of fun a couple weeks ago. There's one, I think there's one song in Antony and Cleopatra. There's a I love the bar scenes in Shakespeare. They're on this galley with Sextus Pompey and all the soldiers from the generals and on both sides are there, and they're getting drunk, and Lepidus is who is one of the 3 in the second triumvirate, along with Mark Antony and
Octavius.
Octavius Caesar. He's just flat out drunk, falls drunk on his face, and they just have this round. They sing this round a song, a drinking song, and they just sing it in a round. So I said, who wants to sing this? And so the whole group, the whole reading class, we divided it up into 3, and we made up our own music and sang it as a round, and it was really fun. And
now, did you bring wine or ale to this? Because it seems like the ingredient you're missing there is tankards full of libation.
Yes. Well, that's one of the advantages of the Zoom class. So when I joined this, when I joined the Santa Fe Zoom class, it was kind of fun.
People everywhere listening right now going, that is one of the advantages of Zoom. I can drink wine off camera and nobody knows it.
Yeah, so it was fun seeing all the ladies there. They would very surreptitiously pick up their wine glass and take a sip, hoping that nobody saw it. But I always have it on grid mode, so I see everybody.
I have my Don't Quill the Messenger coffee mug, and so nobody knows exactly what is inside my Don't Quill the Messenger coffee mug.
Ah, yes. Well, I do bring my coffee mug to class, and I've been known to have a little fireball in it.
See, your secret is out.
Yes.
Your secret is out. So we've sort of touched on it, sort of danced around it a little bit and flirted with the topic because you've made a couple of comments that have, made it pop its head. But the $64,000 question here that I can't wait to get to before we complete our discussion is, how does the topic of Shakespeare authorship play out in your group? It seems to me that you are indeed an authorship skeptic. Some of the comments you've made about the legal details and the music details and the upstart crow aspect. How does that play out amongst the members of your group?
That's an excellent question. Because we're novices in the group, we don't have people like your listeners who are familiar with the authorship question. I only became aware of it myself a few years ago. I had read this book by Brenda James and William Rubenstein called The Truth Will Out, Unmasking the Real Shakespeare. And about the first 40 pages in that book talk about why the traditional story about the writer of Shakespeare is questionable, and that first kind of sowed the seeds of doubt in my mind. But most of the members in our class haven't, I don't think, have been exposed to that. But what we have done, as we've read through the plays, we've been using the New Oxford Shakespeare. It was just published a couple of years ago. And in the New Oxford Shakespeare, the editors, which are traditionalists like Jowett and Gary Taylor and so on, they have found through the stylometrics and language studies that many of the plays have co-authors, and there's been Brian Vickers, for example, has written a book on Shakespeare co-authors. There's one written on the ghost authors, and even this traditional scholars that you sometimes refer to as Stratfordians recognize now that many of the plays have co-authors. So we read one of them. I think it was All's Well That Ends Well, co-authored by Thomas Middleton. And we've seen that there's been, as we've studied in the class when the plays were written, we've seen that over the course of time, things have been added to the play. So, for example, when we read The Tempest, it was pretty clear to us in reading it that the mask sequence was probably added later because of the court interest by Queen Anna and King James, that their interest in the mask and perhaps using this play in the wedding of their daughter Elizabeth, that was probably something added later. And so I think everyone in the class recognizes that there's been additions to the plays. There's been co-authors to the plays. And when you realize that, even in the traditional scholars, that leaves you open to all kinds of possibilities as to how these plays, as we know them now, have come about. So, interestingly, though, in the last month, we've had a new member of our class by the name of Charles Boynton, who teaches Shakespeare at the University of Utah. And Charles has been a guest on Don't Quill the Messenger before, and he is actually a teacher of that. Some of us are. He's going to be teaching a class this spring that some of us are going to be going to, and he's provided some interesting insights as a doubter himself. And I've never talked to him specifically about, his own interpretation of to the question, who wrote Shakespeare? But I certainly don't have a definite opinion in mind myself. I know that the traditional story leaves so many questions. It's really it's kind of impossible to believe the traditional story of the man from Stratford as being the author, but how he plays into the performance, the production of the plays, the King's Men, and how the plays have developed over time. It's a fascinating study, I think, and I think we're going to be getting more into that as we go along.
Well, there are many of my Oxfordian colleagues, as well as those who follow other theories, whether it's, Amelia Bassano, or it's, Mary Sidney, or which I believe is, you've mentioned Robin Williams. I believe she's a proponent of the Mary Sidney theory. The point is many of us believe that the first step in finding the truth is to alert people to the truth of the fallacy of the myth of Shakespeare of Stratford. That's the first step. That's the big step to opening the door for people to then go, okay, well, it's definitely not this guy. So then who was it, or whom was it, or what group of people were it? And as you say, a lot of the traditional scholars are starting to lean towards the groupthink, I always like to refer to it as the Algonquin Club of the Elizabethan era, where you have this group of writers who all get together sort of salon style, not unlike your readers group, except instead of all getting together around a table and reading together, they're all getting around together at a table and writing together. And then maybe reading what they've written out loud and testing it with each other and changing lines and developing new characters. And I think that more and more people are starting to lean towards that direction than any other as time moves on. But I do believe that every step that direction leads us closer to solving the mystery. And it is what I feel is the most intriguing part about it is such an intriguing literary mystery. We all love a good mystery. We need Sherlock Holmes on this case of who is the real Shakespeare,
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, Stephen. My own background is I was a professional genealogist for quite a few years. I'm a historian. My degrees are in history, and what I found in helping, I taught research methodology at BYU, and I found in my library experience and as a genealogist that people love mysteries, and what attracts them to things like this is solving the mystery. But I'll say also that for a reading group like this, people come to this with many different motivations and desires. We have people that are very ill, who are going through difficult times in their lives, and they're there for different reasons. They're not there for solving some historical mystery. Sometimes they're there just for the companionship. They're living alone, and this provides a community for them. One of the things that Robin shared with me is that there was an elderly member in her group that said, "We came to this reading group because we love Shakespeare, and we stay because we love each other." And what we found in this group is a bond and relationship. And I'm going slow with it. The reason I'm not doing Hamlet is it's a very complex play, and even though it's perhaps one of the more autobiographical plays, I'm saving that to the last one. I love the sonnets. I want to read the sonnets, but I'm holding off on those because there's so many different.
Sure.
We can get in the weeds on that, and so what I'm trying first is to go through with this reading group, go through all the plays, and kind of get us up to speed, so we're on the same page with understanding Shakespeare, and then we'll get into Twelfth Night. We'll get into Hamlet. We'll get into Venus and Adonis.
One of the difficult things about Hamlet, and I'm curious to hear like how this went when you did Lear, is you have one person who is speaking for Hamlet. He has 50% of the lines. So you have one person who is talking for half of the entire reading. And then everybody else fills in. And with Lear, it's not quite as bad as all of that, but it can be as overwhelming. In Othello, Iago is a giant role and does at least 30 to 40% of the speaking in that play. So I could see wanting to, sort of stay away from the plays that have these central leading characters that sort of monopolize the speech, and sort of spreading it out more to the more ensemblic style shows where more people get an opportunity and there are more relationships to play with. And that totally makes sense. I do love that you mentioned that, though, about the community that you have established with this group of people. And I can sense from the emotion in your voice that you feel like you have really touched the lives of others through this. And I think that's magnificent. And I don't know that that was a goal of the intent of the initial impetus to create this group, but it certainly is a wonderful benefit of having formed this group and guiding these people through these wonderful works of literature that are so human in so many ways. For a period of time when I lived in Southern California, I taught a Shakespeare course at a assisted living senior community. And I don't know that if this has happened to you or not, but, I would go, it was every 2 weeks, and I would go each session, and sometimes you'd turn around and you'd ask and say, where's Jim today? And somebody would have to tell me, well, Jim passed away in the last 2 weeks and he won't be coming back. And that was really difficult for me in that environment, because you got to know these people and you got to share their minds with them over these great texts. And then suddenly they were gone. I don't know if that's happened to you with your group, but that can be a difficult part of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite parts in all of Shakespeare is in As You Like It, where Jakes talks about all the world's a stage and all the men and women are merely players, and and that's so true. We're life is so short. We in life we have our exits and entrances. We had one gentleman who came for our second play, and then was diagnosed with a neurological disorder, and hasn't been able to come in person. He's come to participated by Zoom, and I visited him weekly at a rehabilitation center to talk, and he expresses by text to me that the greatest desire of his heart is to come back and be with us at Shakespeare Readers. He's found that to be at this stage in his life the greatest enjoyment he has, and in As You Like It, it talks about the 7 stages of life. Infancy, the schoolboy, the lover, the soldier, the justice, and then. And then, interestingly, the 6th stage, you become older and you become lean, and you find yourself into a slippered pantaloon with spectacles on your nose and a pouch on the side. And then finally, the last scene at all, the 2nd childness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. And that's where we are. And I see that in our group. We've had several people I think that can no longer come, and they're sliding away from us, and to be able to provide this this joy to them of community and reading this and giving them the hope. And it's a difficult world that we're living in, and I think Shakespeare speaks to us from the past for all time. In Hamlet, there's a line that says, "If circumstance lead me, I will find where truth is hid, though it were hid indeed within the center." And so, for those of us who are in the quest for who the author is, we can read together and understand it at that level. But for others, there's something personal, some personal truth that they're seeking, and I think in Shakespeare we can find that, whether it's something personal we learn about ourselves or something we learn about the author.
That's extremely well said, and what you're providing is a level of fellowship. And it's one of the reasons I believe that the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship is named such. It used to be a society, and it was two organizations, and they merged together and decided on the name Fellowship, which I think is one of the best decisions in the history of the movement. Is we are all a fellowship, and regardless of whether you are a new skeptic, new doubter, just a Shakespeare-phile who has suddenly discovered the authorship question even exists, or you're a staunch Oxfordian or Baconian or Nevillian or wherever it is that people believe, what we do find is throughout the organization and throughout all of us across the world now, because this program has listeners in more than 100 different countries. And what we can all cleave to is at least that fellowship, that we all have intriguing minds, that we're all intelligent people, that we love these works, and that we are all willing to ask these questions together. And it's one of the reasons why I love providing this podcast series. And I love having guests like you who know you haven't been studying the Shakespeare authorship question for 20 years. You haven't even been studying Shakespeare for 20 years. But the study you are doing right now is incredible. And the difference that you're making in the lives of the people who are a part of it is also incredible. And my hat's off to you, sir, for that.
Well, thank you. And, we're just our group is just standing on the shoulders of giants. There's reading groups throughout the country, San Diego, Seattle, Denver. I've participated in some of those, and I found out through Robin that there was a group, actually a group of Shakespeare readers in I think Santa Fe or Albuquerque, that started in about 1910 and existed for about 100 years up till 2010, and they've been doing it there in Santa Fe for 20 years, and what they've done there is give us a model, give us a way to reproduce this experience, and it is something that it can be reproduced everywhere in every country, every community, and it can be reproduced across time as well.
So before we wrap up, then what kind of advice, what kind of last words can you share with listeners of the program if they're interested in joining a group like this, if they're interested in forming their own group like this? What should they do?
Well, I would go to the website ireadshakespeare.org, because there's all the kinds of materials to help you get started. One of the things that Robin has done, besides producing these readers editions, which I mentioned, she has cast lists that break down every act and scene and all the characters and the number of lines. And we use that cast list for assigning the characters. We just volunteer. And for some of those plays, like you mentioned, like when we did Antony and Cleopatra with two major roles, we divide those up, and so every week we have a different Antony, a different Cleopatra, a different King Lear, and so that ireadshakespeare.org is a great resource that I would recommend.
That's great. And so ireadshakespeare.org. Also, if they want to connect with you, they can find you at understandingshakespeare.com. Is that correct?
No, that I haven't made that website public, but the Shakespeare Readers Salt Lake is a group on Facebook. We're also on Twitter. We're also on meetup.org as well. But
And some of these groups, I'm assuming, thanks to the innovation of Zoom, some of these groups can be accessed and participated in from anywhere in the world if you have internet access and you're available at the time that the group is meeting, if it's open in that way. So there are probably groups that you can connect to if you're interested, but you don't want to actually start one, or maybe there's not one in your own community. Through the power of technology, you may be able to participate in a group that is open to people all over.
Yeah, and that's correct. San Diego, for example, is open, and the I Read Shakespeare group in Santa Fe, they usually have about 35 people on every Zoom, but there's 256 or so, maybe up to 400 now, who have participated at one time or another and are part of the meetup group. And so if you go to the meetup group for I Read Shakespeare Santa Fe, you'll find all the information you need to participate via Zoom with them. With our own group, we do it via Zoom, but we do it a private Zoom.
And I know you said you're not exactly, haven't made a decision. You're not in one camp or another about who the identity of the author is, but you have shared with us that you have joined the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. And so you are a member of the organization, and receiving information and accessing that information is very easy to do, ladies and gentlemen. You can go to shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org and you can join the organization from there, start receiving your quarterly newsletter and other benefits of membership. And I know you shared with me offline that you have already signed the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt at doubtaboutwill.org. And so you're definitely a professed skeptic, but still seeking the answers to the truth on your own journey. And that's one of the things that we strongly promote here at Don't Quill the Messenger is you're going to find your own questions. You're going to seek your own answers, and eventually you're going to discover the truth that speaks to you most. I think the truth that speaks to all of us, regardless of our journey, is the universal human truths that we find in the canon, in the complete works of Shakespeare, which is why we love them so much.
Absolutely, yes. And I enjoy reading the Oxfordian. I think I have all of the volumes in print for the last 5 years or so. I signed the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt about 4 years ago. I read the newsletter. They're just so much. I just recently got a book edited by one of your speakers, Ramon Jimenez. It's called "The Famous Victories of Henry V." It's fairly new, and if there's somebody who's interested in the Shakespeare authorship question and doesn't have a lot of time, or if they suffer from attention deficit disorder like I do, and you can't finish one of those big tomes, there's about a 15-page introduction to the famous victories of Henry V that is an up-to-date short explanation of the authorship question. And I think, I haven't quite decided, but I think I'm going to reproduce that and share it with my group as kind of an introduction to why we think that there is a question about who the real author is.
Well, you certainly are opening the door to in-depth study of the works, and I believe that the deeper you get into the works, the more and more prevalent the realization becomes that it's impossible that a glovemaker's son from a country bumpkin town could possibly have written all of this literature about all of these magnificent things and in such detail. As you mentioned before, things like legal jokes and references that only the members of the Inns of Court would understand and get and absorb. to musical compositions, and perhaps even some of what we might call the first musical theater being invented by the author of the Shakespeare canon.
Well, it's so amazing. Another book we use in class is The Shakespeare's Guide to Italy by Richard Paul Rowe, and we've used
I love that book.
We've used the chapters for The Tempest and All's Well That Ends Well. He provides maps. He provides photographs of these actual places. It's just phenomenal how enriching that book is for the Italian plays. It's something I'd really recommend as well for reading. There's about 12 or 14 plays that he covers in that book, and just provides it. My wife and
I are already planning what is going to be our 10-year anniversary trip to Italy next fall, and we are going to use Richard Rowe's book as our tour manual, and we are going to do the Oxfordian tour of Italy on our trip when we go in 2023. That's our plan.
Well, that sounds fun. I'm going to Greece this fall, and so I'm going to try to go to some of those places, particularly in Athens. Maybe read Timon of Athens before I go.
That's a good idea. You pop by Ephesus along the way.
Yes, we will be in Ephesus, where a Comedy of Errors takes place, and I'm looking forward to being there too.
Also, one of the greatest theater monuments ever built there in Ephesus. There's a magnificent outdoor Greek theater there. I haven't ever been to it, but I've always wanted to. So when you're there, if you wouldn't mind, just step up on the stage and recite a few lines from your favorite Shakespeare play. Record that, and you have my phone number now. You can text me the video. That would be awesome.
Okay, will do, Stephen.
All right. Well, thank you, Ray, so much for joining us. We really appreciate your insight on your group and on your journey as a Shakespeare file, as a doubter, and as a fellow quiller. We thank you for sharing your experiences with us, all of us fellow quillers. Want to remind you, fellow quillers, you can find out more by visiting ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. And if you'd like to reach me, please do so. I love to hear from you. That's contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com, contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Send me your emails, send me your complaints. I love complaints. Send me your criticisms, send me your corrections, send me your suggestions, and send me contact information for the guests that you would like to hear on the program in future episodes. I'm always open to receive your comments. That's contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Until next time, fellow quillers, don't forget, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
Dragon Wagon.